Today we're going to take a look at creating some console applications with C# using Visual Studio. Need to open Visual Studio, go to File, New Project. If we need to, we can search the console, select console.app.net framework. So we'll bring up, I have some old ones here that I used. I'm going to go to create a new project. I'm looking for console.app.net framework. If you have to, you can search in here for console. See, it gives you a couple choices. There's the console.app.net framework. Click on there, double click, or down here we can go to the next button. Configure our project. We will call it print hello world. I am going to save mine out to the desktop in a folder called console applications. Select that folder. You can see that's where my location is going to be now. Solution name is hello world. Go ahead and create this. And you can see when we bring it up, minimize my view a little bit. We have some code already in here for us. You got the using system, system collections, link, text, threading test. These are just different things we can use to help us code. Using systems. Next thing you see is namespace, internal class program, static void main, string args, and then our code will go here. So you can see our namespace is what we called our print hello world. We have an internal class called program, our static void main string args. That's where the code is actually going to start. We'll put our code goes here. Go back to our PowerPoint. So the namespace print hello world, this declares a namespace called print hello world, and namespace is used to organize code and prevent naming conflicts. Internal class program, inside the namespace there is a class called program. Classes in C# are used to define the behavior and properties of objects. We'll get into this in a later date. Internal is an access modifier that restricts public access to the class to within the same assembly. It is more restrictive than public and less restrictive than private. Static void main string args. This is the entry point into the program. In C#, the main method is the starting point of execution. Static means that this method belongs to the class itself rather than to an instance of the class. Void indicates the method does not return any value. Main is a special method named or recognized by the runtime as the entry point for the program. It takes an array of strings as a parameter, which allows the program to accept command line arguments. So the provided code essentially sets up a simple program with a class name program in the print hello world namespace, and the execution starts from the main method when the program runs. So that's what I just described: the print hello world, the class program, static void main string args. When the program starts, it looks for this line, looks for the keyword main, and starts running our code that gets written in here. So let's start writing some code. Of course, as we call it print hello world, that's the first thing we're going to do. Start out with a very simple program. And when you write to the console, you have to use console.writeLine. Console is the object from system. WriteLine is the method that the object allows us to use, and in the parentheses here is what we're going to pass through it to have it write to the console. So all we're going to do is put hello world in here. Lines have to end with the semicolon. If you don't, you'll see a red squiggly arrow right here at the end. A lot of times if you hover over that, that'll tell you what the problem is. This is saying that it's expecting a semicolon, so we put our semicolon in, and it should look good, no errors. Now to run your program, come up to the top up here. You have a start here, and then you have a little green arrow with no color in it. This starts running it with no debugger on. That's what we want to use for now because we're not planning on debugging this. So we click on the button, our console comes up, and here's our code called Hello World. So that worked as we wanted it to. Console.WriteLine again writes it out to the console, and Hello World is what we wrote. We can come in and change this. Have a great day. Run this again, and you can see Hello World, have a great day. So very basic. That just prints it out to the console so you can read it. A lot of times you'll use that to get feedback from a user, and we'll show some of that here in the next couple of demonstrations. We'll close that. We'll go ahead and create another one called Print an Integer. Come over here to where it says Solution Print Hello World 101 Project. Right click on that. Scroll down to Add. We're going to add a new project. Goes back to our Add a New Project screen. We're using the Console App.NET Framework again. Click on the next button to get it to come up. We're going to call this Print Integer. Just leave everything like it is. Going out to our Print Hello World location. We'll create that. And again, it comes up pre-populated with some code for us. Like we said previously, our code that we want to write is going to go in the static void main. So we'll put our code here. And so the first thing we want to do is we're going to print out an integer number. So we have to declare a variable and the data type that we're going to use for it. The data type we're going to use is an integer. And our variable, we're just going to call it number, since that's what we're going to print out. And again, the line has to end with a semicolon. Do another console write line, and we're going to ask the user to enter a number. Red squiggly at the end saying we need a semicolon. We'll put that in, and the red squiggly error message goes away. And again, the console.WriteLine prints out what's in the parentheses inside the quotes to the console. So we could run this now, and we can see it will say enter a number. Got to change my drop down to pick the proper program. And there it says enter a number, just like we have it typed in. Enter a number, enter a number. So now, to get that number from the user, we have to call our variable and assign it the value. And when we assign it a value, we just call our variable, which we declared up here, as an integer. And we will assign it a value by using the equal sign. And we're going to convert this to an integer. And then do a console.read line. And what this is doing here is to convert to integer. When we do a write line and then use a console.read line to get the value from the user, this read line comes in as a string. A string is text, and we're looking for an integer, so we have to convert what the user is putting in from a string into an integer, and that way it'll understand it when we run it. So now we are getting the value of the number from the user. We just want to write this out to the screen, so we're going to do another console.WriteLine. As you can see, it's grayed out here. IntelliSense will help type a lot of your code out for you, which is nice, but if you don't understand what it's doing, it could get you in trouble. You go in for an interview and they ask you a question about it and you don't understand because IntelliSense did it all for you. So as you're doing this IntelliSense, it's great, but make sure you understand what it's saying. So what we're going to do here is just do a console.WriteLine, and we're just going to call our number that we declared here as an integer, that we assign the value of what the user entered via this read line, converting it to an integer, and then it's going to print it out to the screen with the console.write line. So let's take a look at the program. We'll go ahead and run it. It says enter a number. We'll enter 32, hit enter, and you can see it prints out 32 here. Just to make it look a little more clean, let's add some text to it to make it look good. The number you entered is, and we're going to use string interpolation here, and string interpolation allows us to create a string and put our variables in it as part of the string but still show our variables. To do that, you have to use the squiggly brackets, and we're going to put our number inside the squiggly brackets. So string interpolation, it starts with the $ and then followed by quotation marks. Put whatever text or variables you want in there. Our text for this one is the number you have entered is, and our variable, which is in the squiggly brackets, is number, which we declared up here and assigned a value to there, and we're putting it here. So let's run this again. It says enter a number, we'll do 44, and it says the number you've entered is 44, just as we expected. Console.write line, enter a number, that's it there. The number we entered is 44. This console.read line gets that value and assigns it to our variable called number. And then we do a console.write line, the number you entered is, and then put our variable in there. And you can see it here, the number you entered is 44. So another fairly easy, straightforward one. This one we're using the write line to ask the user to enter a number. This one we're using a read line to get that value of the number. And we're using another write line to print that number out to the screen for the user to see. The next example we'll do is we'll call add two integers. So let's create a new project. Again, we're using the console app.NET framework. We can double click on it. It gets us to our configure new project. We'll call this add two integers. Go ahead and create that. Again, our code's for us ready. We got our static void main string args, which tells the computer this is where our program's starting from. Enter comment here. 2 slashes is a comment for a single line. Enter our code here. We'll declare a couple variables. Since we're going to add two numbers, we got to declare at least two variables for the numbers that we're entering. So we'll do an int num1, int num2, and if you want, you can declare both of these on the same line. So let me comment these out real quick, and you can do an int num1, num2, and that is doing the same thing here as it does up here. I personally like it on the single lines like this. It's a little bit easier to walk through and find than digging through like this. So I'm going to comment that one out, uncomment these, and then we'll also need something to hold the value of our total once we add the two numbers together. So I will do an int total for our last one. And if I wanted to, I could add the total on the end line like that, and it'd still work just fine since we're declaring three variables, num1, num2, and total as an int. You can put them all in one line, and that will work just as well as this. To me, I've always coded it this way, and it's always looked cleaner. I'm going to stick with that for now. I will do some examples later on that have them all in the same line just to kind of show you how it works. So again, we got to ask the user to put some values in. So we're going to do a console.write line, And I'm just going to give it a title for now and call it calculate the sum of two numbers. Red squiggly at the end is telling us we got to put the semicolon in. Once we put the semicolon there, the squiggly goes away. I'm going to do another console write line to ask the user to enter some values for us. So input number 1, semicolon, and end of the line. So now we got to get that value that the user is going to enter for number 1. And again, we'll do num1 equals, and again, we're going to use the write line. When the write line is read, it comes back as a string. Well, we declared our num1 as an integer up here, so we're going to have to convert it from a string to an integer. Again, to do that, we do a convert. And you can see IntelliSense is already kind of filling it out for us. So I'm going to go ahead and tab through here and use the IntelliSense instead of typing it all out. So there's our num1. We're converting it to an integer. Do a console.readline. So when that readline comes in as a string, it converts it to an integer. And that's what we declared it up here. And that's the way we're going to use it, as an integer. We need to ask for a second number now. Console.writeLine and put number 2, and we got to get that value of number 2, so we're going to do it just like we did for num1. Call it num2 equals convert to int 32, console.readline. Again, that console.readline picks up the value that the user enters. Now that we got both values, we want to total those up together, so we're going to use our total integer variable that we created up top here. And we're going to do total and assign it the value of num1 plus, and you can see IntelliSense again. Pretty smart. It's telling us it wants to add num2 with it. That's what we want, so let's just go ahead and tab through and do that. So now we assigned our variable total, num1 plus num2, so that should give us the value we're looking for. So to get it to show up on the screen, we got to do another console.writeLine again, and we'll say the total of num. Now let's just do the total of, and we'll do num1. And we're doing string interpolation, so we got to start it with the $sign for it to work, followed by a quotation mark. Total sum num1 plus squiggly bracket num2 close squiggly bracket equals, and then we can just put the total in here. Add our semicolon at the end, and when this prints out, it should total whatever number we enter for 1 with number 2 and print it out and show us what we did. So let's run this and see what comes up. Enter a number, we'll do 11, and I need to do my drop down again to switch my project. So now if I run this, there it is, calculate the sum of two numbers, just like our heading, calculate the sum of two numbers. Input number 1, input number 1. So let's do that 11 again. Input number 2, and you can see we ask right here, this right line, input number 2. So we'll do 23, and of course our answer should be 34. The total of 11 plus 23 is 34, just what we expected. So another pretty easy, straightforward one using 3 variables this time. A number 1 and number 2 in a total. They're all integers. A couple write lines, one for the title, another one to ask the user to input the first number. We use a read line, assign the value of it to number 1. Another write line to get the input for the number 2 from the user. Take the user's number 2 number that they entered, assign it to num2 variable that we created, use the total variable that we created to hold the values of num1 plus num2. We write them out to the console again. Total of num1 plus num2 is total. Again, we use string interpolation because of the $sign and the quotation marks. The total of is a string. The number 1 and number 2, they're in the curly brackets. That's using our variable to display it to the screen. And again, with total, we use our variable to display it to the screen. The next one we're going to do is we are going to create a new project, console.app, console.app.net framework, go to next. We will call this one multiply two floating point numbers multiple two floating point numbers. We'll go ahead and create that. Again, it populates code for us. Got the static void main string args. This is where we start writing our code. In between these two squiggly brackets here. Don't mess with anything outside of those, else you'll end up having some errors and issues that you're going to have to go back and fix, and it can be a hassle. So what we're going to do here is create 3 variables, number 1 and number 2, and a product, so we can hold our values. So we'll do a float. And as I said previously on the last example, we can put them all in the same line and it'll declare them the same way. So we'll go ahead and do that for this. And this is just saying number 1 is a float, number 2 is a float, the product is a float, and it puts it all in one line. Saves a little bit of space coding. I still like the other way. It looks more clean to me for some reason. So let's do a console.writeLine to get the user to put a value in for us. So enter number 1. Put our semicolon there. We got to get the value of that number 1 from the user. So we'll use our variable, assign it the value, and we are doing a convert again because, like I said previously, when you use the console.readLine to get the value from a user, it comes in as a string. We're not using a string, we're using floats in this one. So now we're going to have to convert it to a float. The way you do that is to single. And you can see my spelled convert wrong, so it's giving me red squiggly under convert, telling me the name covert does not exist. You can click on this show potential fixes and it could give us an answer to our issue, so we can click on this and we'll see what it is. And we're going to select this bottom one that says change covert to convert, and that's what we want. Changes it to convert from covert. And now we can continue coding. The single here is because I don't have any value with it. So as soon as I add something to it, I'm going to do a console.readLine. This gets the value from the user and converts it to a single, which is a float. In this case, I'll do another console.writeLine to get the second value from the user, and we got to get that value and store it somewhere. So we're going to do number 2, assign it the value of that convert to single, console.readLine again. Like I said, IntelliSense can be very smart and help you save a lot of coding time, but it can also cause problems, and you also need to know what you're trying to do in order to follow along right. So just kind of keep an eye on that. So now we have 2 numbers that the user entered. We want to multiply those together. So we're going to do product, which we declared up on line 13 as a float. So product is going to equal, and you can see IntelliSense filled this out for me, and I don't want that, so that's where I said it can be a hassle. I want to take number 1, and you can see IntelliSense wants me to add them. I'm not looking to add them this time, so I want to multiply them. The multiply, when you're writing code, is Shift 8 key, which is the star or the asterisk, whatever you want to call it. And I'll do number 2 since that's what we're wanting to multiply it by. Put my semicolon there. And now we're going to write this out. There's a couple ways of writing this. We can do it old school. I'll show you old school real quick, and then I will use string interpolation. Actually, I'll start with string interpolation, and then I'll go old school and show you the composite formatting style. So we'll do, let me make a note here of what we're doing. String interpolation. The string is defined using the $sign before the opening quote. Which indicates string. And this is going to take up a couple lines, so I will show you how to code for multiple lines. And you can see, do a slash, forward slash, asterisk, and we can put it down on the next line, and this will allow us to write as many lines as we want. To close it, we just do the slash on the opposite side. You can see all of our squigglies back here turn white again. If I take that away, turns them green because it's considered commented it out. If I put that line back, it goes back white. So then we can continue typing in here. Indicate string interpolation. The expression inside expression inside the curly braces, or as I call them, the squiggly brackets, are evaluated. Results are inserted into the string at those positions. This is a concise and readable way to format. This is the way I prefer. It's cleaner, it looks good. So now I will do a console.writeLine to get this to show to the screen. And again, string interpolation, you start with the $sign, the parent or quotation mark. And I'm just going to say number 1 times number 2 equals the product close my parentheses. parenthesis and put my semicolon. So now we're taking our number 1, just put a little multiplication sign in there, number 2, and then it equals our product. So if we run this, then I gotta make sure I pick the right one from the drop down. As you can see, all of our applications are showing up here in this drop down. You gotta make sure you select the right one. Here's our multiply 2 floating point numbers. We'll select that. We'll go ahead and run that. So as you can see, enter number 1. That's what it's showing on the screen. So we'll do 4. Enter number 2. We'll do a 4 for that. And if everything works, it should say 4 times 4 is 16, and it does. 4 times 4 is 16. And that's using the string interpolation method to show you one way you can print it out. I will show you the old school way called composite formatting now. Yeah, I'll just comment this out like this. So you can see this is a comment out a block of code or whatever you want to comment. This is a single line, 2 slashes, single line. So now composite formatting, IntelliSense is already wanting to start writing the next bit of code for us. We don't want that yet. So composite formatting contains placeholders replaced by the values of the corresponding arguments. Passed to the console. Actually, I'll go ahead and put this on another line. Passed to the console. Dot right line method. So an example of that, I'll do a console dot gotta make sure it's inside these squiggly brackets here. Console dot right line. And with that, we will do put quotations, and then our placeholders, you do it the same way. You'll put the squiggly brackets or the curly braces, whatever you want to call them. Give that a value of 0. And then our multiplication sign, a 1. And these all go inside these curly brackets or squiggly brackets, curly braces, whatever you want to call them. Our equal sign, and then a 2. And now we have to add the arguments that we want it to pick up. So number 1, and this number 1 should go outside of the quotation marks. So we got number 1, number 2, and product. Put my semicolon at the end, and if we run this, I'll do 4 times 4 again. 4 times 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. So this time we used the composite formatting to print out our answer. This is the older way of doing it. Not as easy to read as the console.write line. So let me, or as the, string interpolation. So let's run this again, and we'll do 22 times 2, 44. Go ahead and comment this out. We'll uncomment string interpolation, run it again, and we'll do 33 times 2, and it's 66. So we see we get the same answer, same printout. It's just a different way of doing it. String interpolation is the more common modern way of doing it now. The composite formatting is the older way of doing it. Either way works. I would stick with string interpolation. Just looks better, easier to read. That's it for multiplying two floating numbers. Let's go on to finding the largest of three numbers. So we'll go to add new project. Again, our recent project templates. We want this console app.net framework. You can click the next button or double click on it, whatever you want to do. I'll show you both ways. So we call this find largest of three numbers. Go ahead and create it. Does a little bit of code for us. You can see here's the title of it there in the namespace. Put our code inside the squiggly brackets. First thing I like to do, and most of the time you should do it, is declare your variables. So I'm going to have three numbers. Int number 1, int number 2, and you can see IntelliSense, pretty smart. It's already known we want three numbers, so let's just tab through it, do that. We also need a string in this one, and our string name is going to be result. When declaring variables, you want to use camel case. You can see lowercase for the first word, uppercase for the second word. That's considered camel case. Our string result only has one word, so we can just leave it as all lowercase. Usually you'll use capital letters on your classes, on your namespace, and then the static void main. So now that we got that declared, we need to have the user enter the first number, and again, like we've been doing, is you use a console.writeLine, and we'll say enter the first number, and then we got to get the value of that first number, and we're going to assign it. Since we're using an int, we got to convert that to int 32, and we're going to do a console read line here. Gotta close it. So that gets our value of number 1 from the user, stores it in the variable number 1 that we declared up here as an integer. Got to get the second number, so there's console.writeLines ready for us. Enter the second number, and once they enter that second number via the console.readLine, we got to store that value somewhere, so we'll use number 2, assign it, convert integer 32. IntelliSense already knows what we want. That is what we want, so let's go ahead, tab through, and use it. And we got to get the third number. Enter the third number. And we're asking them for the third number. When they enter it, we got to store it somewhere, so we're going to store it in the variable number 3 that we created. We're going to assign it the value from the console.readLine, convert it to an integer 32. IntelliSense again is telling us ahead of time what we want to do, so let's go ahead and tab through it and accept it. So now we have the console.writeLine asking the user to enter the first number. we get the first number from this console.read line, convert it to an integer, and store it in this number 1. And the reason we convert it to an integer is because we called number 1 up here the data type of an integer, so we have to convert it so it knows to use it the proper way. If you leave it a string, it will give you some issues when you try and compare numbers and values later on. So we convert it to an integer so we can use it with no issues. So now we have to do an if statement. We haven't covered if statements yet, but this would kind of give you an idea for later on if you need an example or want to look back at this. You can get an if statement. So you do an if. And the if statements, you follow it up with parentheses. Inside these parentheses, you do a so inside the parentheses, you'll do a conditional expression. So what we want to do here is check to see if number 1 is greater than number 2, and if number 1 is greater than number 3. And after your conditional statement, you put some squiggly brackets for the body of the if statement. And if this condition is true, you'll put code in here. And if it's true, we'll say result equals. And here we're not going to have to do a console.read line or write line yet. We're just, since our result is a string, we're just going to put a string inside the result, assign it the result variable value, and just say the first number is the greatest among the 3 numbers. But if that's not true, then we have to do an else if statement. And again, it's the same thing. It's just saying if number 1 is greater than number 2 and number 1 is greater than number 3. If it's true, give the value of the result, the string here, the first number is greatest among the 3 numbers. Else, if that's not true, we'll do another conditional expression and check to see if number 2 is greater than number 1, and IntelliSense already knows we're checking number 2 is greater than number 3, so we can go ahead and tab through this. It puts our squiggly brackets on for the body of our else if statement, and if that conditional statement number 2 is greater than number 1 and number 2 is greater than number 3, we will set result to equal the value of the second number is the greatest among the 3 numbers. I think I spelled that right. Semicolon at the end of that line. With the if statements, you don't put a semicolon at the end of it. You just do an if, parentheses, put your conditional statement inside the parentheses, put the squiggly brackets, and then your body of code inside the squiggly brackets. Same with the else if. Put the parentheses, put your conditional statement inside the parentheses, and then the squiggly brackets, and we will put the variable result in there, and the second number is the greatest among the 3 numbers string as the value of it. And if neither one of those are true, then we'll do an else, and the else is just followed up by squiggly brackets, no parentheses or anything like that. So then we can do else the result will equal the third number is the greatest among the three. And I could have copied and pasted that to save some time. I probably should have, but oh well. So what we're doing now is we ask the user to enter the first number. They enter the first number, we get it by this console.read line. Of course, the console.read line comes in as a string. Well, our number one is an integer, so we have to convert that to an integer. So that's what we're doing here. So we convert whatever the user enters in here into an integer, and we'll store it in our variable that we declared up here as number one. Same thing here. We ask the user to enter a second number. When we get it with this console.read line, it comes in as a string. We have to convert it to an integer, and we store it in the variable number 2 that we created. And finally, we ask the user to enter a third number. The console.read line brings it in as a string. We convert it to an integer and store it in our variable number 3. We do an if statement to see which of these statements is true. So we're saying if number 1 is greater than number 2 and number 1 is greater than 3, of course the result should be the first number is the greatest among the 3 numbers. But if that's not true, it skips this line of code. It skips line 29, goes down to 31, and checks to see if number 2 is greater than number 1 and number 2 is greater than number 3. And if that's true, then it prints out the result. The second number is the greatest among the 3 numbers. And if for some reason that isn't true, if number 2 isn't greater than 1 and number 2 isn't greater than 3, well, of course we know number 3 is the third number among the 3. And the reason we're using the double ampersand sign, that stands for and. It's so this is the and operator. And if we were to do it like this, the 2 pipes, that would mean or. So that means only one of these 2 conditions would have to be right to make it correct. So this would be like number 1 is greater than number 2 or number 1 is greater than number 3. We don't want it to be greater than one or the other. It has to be greater than both of them. So we use the and operator, which is the 2 ampersand signs. Now it has to be greater than number 2 and has to be greater than number 3. So now that we have our conditional statements set up, our if-else statements, we got to have this print out somewhere. So let's get this to print out to the console like we've been doing all along. So just under our closing of the else there, we'll do another console.write line. And we will just print out the result. So the console.write line, we've been putting string interpolations in all these so far. Now we're just going to splat this variable result in here. And whatever result it ends up on, it's going to print out the corresponding string that goes with it. So let's run this and see what we get. Let's make sure we select the right application, find the largest of 3 numbers, go ahead and run it. Here it's asking us to enter the first number just like we have, so let's enter 22. It says enter the second number just like we have it up there. We'll enter 55 and enter the third number, and you can see it's asking us there, enter the third number. We'll put 1, and now it's going to do our if statements. So we can see here, first number is 22, number 1 is greater than number 2, and number 1 is greater than number 3. Well, as we can see here, the first number is not greater than the second number, but it is greater than the third. But because we have the ampersand signs in there, it's saying it has to be greater than 2 and 3. We know it's not, so it should skip over line 29. It'll come to line 30 and say, is number 2 greater than number 1? Yes. And number 2 greater than number 3? Yes. So it should drop into this line of code here, line 33, and print out the second number as the greatest number. Because it does find the answer and drops in here, it skips the rest of the code and it will go down to this console.writeLine result. So let's try it. Hopefully we get the second number is the greatest among the 3. And we do. The second number is the greatest among the number 3. So we'll run that again. And we'll do 66, 22, and 1. So for logic is right, it should be 1 is the greatest number. The first number is the greatest number among the 3 numbers. And let's try it one more time to see if we can get number 3 to be our largest. 155 and 99. And now, because we're saying 1 is greater than 2, nope, that's not right. So we automatically know it's going to drop and check in this if else. Is number 2 greater than number 1? Yes. And is number 2 greater than number 3? No. So then we'll go down to this else statement and it should hit this result. The third number is the greatest among the 3 numbers. And it does. The third number is the greatest among the 3 numbers. And of course I spelled greatest wrong. Greatest among the 3 numbers. So it did do as expected. The third was the greatest number, and that's the one it printed out. So that was a little more involved. We did some if statements, else ifs, and an else statement. We'll get to those later on when we start doing some conditional statements and that. So that's just an example, printing some stuff out to the console so you can kind of see how some of this is done. We'll do another one called odd or even. So let's go ahead and create a new project. Again, we're going to use this console app.NET framework. And we'll call it odd or even. Go ahead and create that. It gives us our code starting. Again, we go inside the squigglies of that static void main. This time we're going to declare a variable and use the data type of integer for it, so int for integer. We're only going to use one number this time, so we'll just call it number. We have to use the console.writeLine as we've been doing to ask the user to enter a number. We'll say an integer, that way if somebody gets smart and puts a decimal point in, technically it'll work since we're not coding any validation for it, but this way at least if we put an integer they'll know. Or I could put a whole number, enter a whole number. Semicolon to end the line. And now we have to get that number that the user enters again. And we declared our variable number. The data type is an int, so let's get that from the user. So we'll assign a number value of, well, we got to convert it again. We do want to convert it to an int32 from the console.readline, so we'll tab through that to save some typing. So now we ask the user to enter a whole number. We get that whole number from the user through this console.readline, convert it to an integer, so it becomes a number. And we're going to do another if statement here. Again, the if statement, you put parentheses right after it to check a condition. This condition we're going to check and see if the number, when we divide it, we're going to use a math symbol called the mod. And the mod is the parentheses or the %, the shift 5 key. What this is doing is it checks to see when it gets divided by a number that you're giving it, if there's a remainder or not. So whatever number we enter in here, it's going to multiply or divide it by, we're giving it the number 2, and see if there's a remainder or not. So we're going to say if the number we enter is divided by 2 and equals 0, and the reason we're using 2 equal signs is the 2 equal signs is comparing a number. So we're taking this number, modding it 2, which says if take the number, if it's 2, divide it by 2, and is there a remainder? If the remainder is 0, then our statement is true, and we'll say console.writeLine, the number, and we'll use interpolation, string interpolation here, so we can show what our number is. The number, so again, squiggly brackets, we're going to use our variable name number is even. Else, and we can do just an else statement here because we don't have to compare or check anything else. Console.writeLine, we'll use string interpolation again here. The number, and we'll show what our number is by string interpolation, curly brackets, is odd. Close our quotation mark, put our semicolon. So all we're doing here is having the user enter a number, convert the number that the user enters into an integer, storing it in our number variable that we created up top here. Now we're doing an if statement saying if the number, when it's multiplied or divided by 2, is a remainder. If there's no remainder, it's going to say the number is even. Else, if there is a remainder, it's odd. And as if you know math, 2 is an even number. Anything divided by 2 should not have a remainder if it's even. If we do a number 3 and mod it by 2, so 3 divided by 2, there should be a remainder of 1. Well, it's not a remainder of 0, so it's going to drop down into our else and say the number is odd. So let's run this, see what we get. The first number, we'll do 44, and I don't want that because this is our old program called find the largest 3 numbers. We got to do our drop down, look for odd or even. Now let's run that. Enter a whole number, we'll do 44, and 44 is even because it's saying if number 44, you divide it by 2, and it has no remainder to it, which 44 divided by 2 we know has no remainder, it goes in there 22 times, then it's even. So now we'll run it again with an odd number. And we'll do 9. And 9 is odd because if we take 9 divided by 2, it goes in there 4 times with a remainder of 1. And again, this mod is checking for a remainder. Since we have a remainder, this statement is not true because this is saying if there's no remainder. So because we have a remainder of 1, this drops down into this else statement and tells us that we have an odd number. Sometimes you'll see 3 equal signs. The 3 equal signs, what that does is it compares the value and the data type of the number on the left with the value and data type on the right. We're not doing that right now. All we're doing is trying to compare the number on the left with the number on the right. And because of that, like I said, even numbers with that mod, that % sign in there, doing 2, it will come back as a 0, no remainder if it's even. That's why it drops in here. If we do a number that's odd, mod it with the number 2, there is going to be a remainder, so that won't work. It will drop down in here and print that out, and so that's why it shows odd. Let's see, what else do we have? I guess that's about it for some of these examples. I could do another quick one called age check. It's another quick if statement one. Do the console app.net framework, and we'll do age check. Again, our code's pre-populated for us to get it started. We want to ask the user to enter an age. So again, it's console.writeLine. Anytime you want something to come out to the console, out to the screen, you have to use that console.writeLine. So we'll say enter your age. Again, we got to get that value from the user. I didn't declare the variable up top. I'll just declare it here real quick. String age string, and then we'll do a console.readLine. So now we're going to do an if statement because we're going to check some ages. So if, and because we're declaring this a string, but we're going to check it against an integer, we got to do some things for it. This is a little bit advanced for what we're doing right now, but we can, I'll give you an example. So we're going to do an int.try parse, and what this is doing is say take our age string and see if we can parse it to an int. If we can, we want it to come out as an int and call it age. So now we will use age as our variable for this. And then say if age is greater than 21, console.writeLine, and say welcome to the show, or semicolon, else, because we need to do another check on the age to see if they're underage. We'll have to do an else if age is greater than, we want actually less than 21. We're going to say console.writeLine, you're too young to enter. And if all is good, we'll run this, we'll check an age, and if it's over 21, they'll welcome us to the show. If it is under 21, it'll tell us we're too young to enter the show. So let's find our program and drop down, age check, we'll run that. Enter your age, we'll say 33, and because 33 is greater than 21, we're welcome to the show. This again, and we'll say we're 16, and it's saying we're too young to enter. So that was a quick age check program there. We use this int try parse because we're calling this age string a string, getting it from this console read line, which comes in as a string. In the previous versions that we did, or the examples, we did a convert to an int and such to get it. Well, age string, we're calling it a string, we're assigning it this value console.readLine, and I could do it like this if I wanted to. I can declare the string up top, say string, age string, and then I would just come down here and say age string equals console.readLine. So I could do it like that, a little bit extra typing. It's nice to always declare your variables up top. That way if you have an issue or need to see something, you can just scroll to the top of your program and see what your variable is and what data type you're using. And it'll still work the same, so let's run this. Make sure I close my windows out. Run this. Enter my age. 25. Welcome to the show. Let's see what happens if we put 21 in, because all we're saying it's greater than 21 or less than 21. What happens if it's exactly 21? So enter my age 21, and it doesn't know what to do because we don't code for it. So let's code for it real quick. So if age is greater than or equal to 21, now we should have it working right if we enter exact age of 21. So 21, welcome to the show. And that's because we added this age is greater than or equal to 21. Put 21 in, it's equal to it, so it's true, and drops down to this line here. Again, if we run it and put 19 in for our age, we're too young to enter because our age is less than 21, and it picks up this line here. So that's a quick, easy age check. And again, this int try parse just takes this age string, which we declared as a string. That's why I named it age string, so we could see that a little easier. If you can parse it, and it does, put it out as an integer of age, and that's why we're checking age here now instead of age string. So we'll use this try parse stuff later on as we get more into the coding, but as for now, just an example of it. So that's it. That's how you can enter some console applications with C#. There's about 4 or 5 examples there. Feel free to change any of the values, variables, write any more code that you want to it, however you want to configure it to your own. But that's some examples, and we'll work on some later.